Hi there, guys. It's Archie. I'm back for the ADHD Care podcast. I'm pleased to have a special guest with me. I've got Zoe Beezer, who is an educational consultant and assessor. Zoe was formerly a special educational needs coordinator and also an assistant head for inclusion, wellbeing, and diversity at a private secondary school in Surrey. Welcome, Zoe.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you. So this is the second time round you coming back to this podcast.
Yeah.
So amazing. So I thought today we can focus on talking about all things transition.
Mm-hmm.
So transition certainly, and when we think about this time of the year that we are in summer. Lots of youngsters are moving into secondary school in September. So I wanted to focus on that, and also other transitions for other young people that are leaving school, maybe moving to college or senior school, universities and things like that. So you've got your own personal experience of raising children that have gone through this transition. So that will be interesting to get your take on this.
Yeah. So obviously I've witnessed a lot of transitions in my professional world, being in school for the many years I've been there, and I've got my own children, who've been through various stages of transition. So we've done the primary to secondary, we've done the secondary to sixth form, and we've done the sixth form to university for some of those. And it's an interesting stage. Yeah,
I bet. So if we can just, so I think for, I'm coming across a lot of youngsters that are worried, some of them excited about moving to secondary school. It's a challenging time for some of them, and if you have ADHD or in addition to that, it can bring yourself some challenges as well, as you know. So I always say to the parents that transition between primary to secondary school sometimes it goes back to choosing the right secondary school for the young person. So maybe if we can just start with the conversation around for parents, maybe their children are about to go into year 6, they're starting to think about secondary school. How would they go about in terms of trying to work out what one is the right school for them, and what steps do they need to take?
Yeah, I suppose it's about choosing the right school for the child you have, rather than the child that you might have wished you might have had, because if you put your child into the wrong setting, that could be quite problematic for the child and then therefore for the family. So I've had to choose various schools, obviously, for my children, and I've been SENCO, where I've been looking at reports coming in for children applying to the range of schools that I've worked at. And I think you've got to investigate your schools, go round them. You can't be going round a school and getting a kind of a gut feeling about how you respond to that environment and the children or the young adults that are there. Talking to the SENCO is quite a good idea as well, because you're going to need to work with that SENCO if you've got a child with ADHD or you've got a neurodiverse child. One of your key points is going to be the SENCO. So working with that SENCO and checking that they hold the same kind of philosophy that you do for support for your child, and meetings with other key people in the school are also good. Often heads will have meetings with people and things like that. So, but I fundamentally, I kind of say I would go with your kind of gut feeling, and where's the child that you've got in front of you? Where are they going to be best? Not the a place where they're perhaps going to be it's going to be too academically rigorous. And by that, I don't mean to kind of downplay their academics. I mean that you're getting a school that's got the right balance between academics, physical exercise, and extracurricular activities and things, so that your child has got a really kind of good balanced curriculum that they're going to find stimulating.
Yeah. On that point that you said about meeting with the SENCO and asking a few questions, can you give us examples of some of the questions that you might recommend for parents to be asking when they're trying to decide what's the right school for their young person?
Yeah, so I'd be saying, if your child is neurodiverse, then the SENCO probably would already have had the report that has been drawn up on your child. But at that point, it's just a piece of paper or pieces of paper in front of the SENCO. They don't know your child beyond what's written on that piece of of paper. So I'd be trying to have a meeting with them and getting their response to that report so that you can see how they've reacted to it, and whether they feel that they are able to support the needs that are listed in the report. And specifically asking them, how would they do it? What would they do? How are they going to help? Or how are they going to oversee the transitions between classes, for example? Or how are they going to help oversee the social situations for your child? So there's so much more to a school than just being in class, and often we kind of focus on that kind of academic side of life, but you want to know that the SENCO is going to be briefing the wider school community so that everyone has an understanding and a sense of compassion about how to make the experience the best it can be for your particular child. So I'd be asking those kind of questions. What have they done in the past for other pupils? What's their strategy? What's their philosophy?
How about things like inspections, Ofsted rate, Ofsted?
Yeah.
Ofsted, yeah, I was about to say Ofsted there. Ofsted ratings as well, because is that something that's very useful? But does that then give you an understanding in terms of SEN if they are well equipped to be able to support? I don't know how the Ofsted inspections go, but would they obviously be looking at?
It's a good starting point, and I should think most parents these days probably would do that kind of background research on the schools that they're looking at, read those inspection reports, see how SEN has been highlighted, see how the social emotional side of school life has been concluded on. As I say, yes, it's great to have excellent teaching, and that's what we would all be striving for and hoping for within the classroom, but do pay attention to those aspects of school life that extend beyond that, because it's in those situations that the child with ADHD can sometimes have some difficulties, isn't it? In those kind of slightly more fluid situations, social situations, where there is less of a routine, less kind of fewer expectations about behaviour perhaps, and that's where a child that sometimes finds it hard to regulate themselves, or has historically had difficulties with friendships and things like that, you'd want to know that those aspects of school life were well taken care of, and that teachers and pastoral staff are aware, and there is a good kind of support system in place to help that integration into the social side of school life. So, what has the school got? A school counsellor, if they need it? Has the school got areas where children can kind of take time out? Is there what's the kind of pastoral team like that is helping to support that side of school life that extends beyond the classroom?
Excellent. Just moving the conversation on to just that whole transition that we're talking about, what would you say are the differences between primary school and secondary school that creates problems for young people with ADHD?
So, often a child might have been at a primary school since reception. It's been the world that they know. They're often quite, in relation to secondary schools, are often much smaller. You tend to stay in the same class with the same teacher. And of course, secondary school goes and shakes that all up, and you move around, you change classes for each subject, you have a different teacher for each subject, and often you have to kind of perhaps travel a bit further. It comes with growing independence, that you might there might be more of an expectation on you to get your own way to or from school, on school transport, or public transport, or walking, or whatever. So it is a time of massive change for all children, not just neurodiverse. It is a big change, but then a factor in the neurodiversity, and it can just become a bit more challenging to do that move away from a known, secure environment that's typically a bit smaller, typically with teachers that you have known for years, and you haven't had to kind of move around, and suddenly you've got a school locker, you've got your PE kit, you've got your pencil cases. In primary school, often that kind of stuff is all there and provided. You have your pens and pencils on the middle of the table, and suddenly you've got so much more organisation factored in. You've got to remember the right books for the right day, you've got to remember your PE kit on the right day, you've got to remember snacks, lunches, whatever.
And not to mention the amount of lessons that they'll be doing at that stage as well. So,
and the day tends to get a little bit longer particularly if you're doing some kind of extracurricular stuff as well. Big changes.
So if you think back to your SEN kind of being a special educational needs coordinator in a secondary school, so you are obviously receiving these young people come through the door. What provisions would you have in place from an SEN point of view to support young people, particularly with ADHD?
So, I mean, in the ideal world, and I appreciate the world isn't ideal, but in the ideal world, the SENCO would have been able to form some kind of contact with the pupil before they leave their primary school. So I know some SENCOs have the time to go and visit the primary schools, particularly the main feeder primary schools and things. So, if you're able to put a face to a name before the term starts, that's ideal. Hopefully the SENCO will have worked a little bit with the parents in terms of what I used to do is I used to pull together what's called a pupil profile, so that I did an overview of the pupil's strengths and weaknesses or their challenges, so that at the beginning of term staff could be kind of briefed. And what tends to happen is on that first inset day you might have an opportunity to brief the staff about those pupils coming in that they need to have a little bit extra information on. So I would tend to try and pull those together at the end of the summer term, or perhaps over the summer, send them out to the parents, so that when school started we could hit the ground running and staff could know what they needed to know about those pupils. And then it's a case of some schools also are doing little kind of preparation days. So often before the end of the summer term, the kids will go in, and it's great if the SENCO can be involved in that, so that they can be there with those year sixes who are soon to be year sevens, to get to know those pupils that it's important for them to know without in that kind of social context. And for some schools, that's simply not possible. And your child might turn up at a school and that hasn't happened. That's fine. The SENCO will have the school, the information that you've sent in about your child. And I'd say probably then you're looking at being a little bit proactive and checking that the SENCO does know your child's needs, giving perhaps a summary email of what you think your child's needs are at that point, because of course when these reports are written things change, and characteristics and things change within your child, and things ebb and flow. So maybe just giving them a little up-to-date picture of who your child is via email, and beginning to form that relationship with the SENCO, so that you can work with them in moments, if there are hiccups along the way, that you've kind of made that initial contact, and then keeping in touch with them and in touch with individual teachers. So, I wouldn't be doing lots of emails to teachers, but you might want a bit of a kind of a summary at the end of the first couple of weeks. How's it going? Yeah. Is there stuff that I need to do as a parent? Is there stuff that I can do to help that will make the transition for my child better for the individual and therefore better for the school community?
Yeah, on that point, certainly, like for us, from a clinical point of view, in terms of like trying to get feedback from schools, certainly when they move to secondary school, that can be tricky.
It is tricky, because they're so busy.
They're so busy, and primary school is easier. You've got one teacher that knows the child and sees them across, all of the kind of subjects and things. But secondary school, as you say, that's the tricky bit where. I've suggested maybe they do like a round robin kind of feedback, but with some schools that I think your previous school actually we did it before, and that seemed to work, but it varies from school to school, and I get it, and certainly the presentation of ADHD or the child's difficulties can present differently in different lessons to different teachers as well.
Yeah.
So as you know, that can make it quite tricky to get an overall picture of exactly what's going on. But those kind of regular check-ins with the school, is that with the SEN, with the SENCO, with the head of year, or?
It depends on your school's policy. So some schools request that you have your initial contact with the form tutor. some schools request that your initial contact is with the head of year, and then it will, in terms of the SENCO, it will depend on what the school that you're going to, what their policy is. So, but I would say, having that relationship with the SENCO that you will build up slowly over time is an important one. So, I probably would just do a short email, just kind of saying, hey, we're really looking forward to starting. This is how I think George is presenting at the moment. And these are the things it would be good for you to be aware of, so that they've got a snapshot of that kind of rising 11-year-old and how they might be presenting. The report might have been written when they were 7, for example. So just that little kind of snapshot. But absolutely, there's got to be understanding how busy these people are, particularly at the beginning of a new school term. So I think there's lots of things that we can do as parents to help ease that transition that doesn't need to involve the school, and that we can be doing to help that whole process. So, out of my 4 children, I've got 2 who are neurodiverse, as Archie knows, and so that's been interesting, kind of seeing the different ways that they respond to those kind of transitions, and that perhaps increased anxiety that you can see in the build up to those big changes in life.
And at that point, just remind me, were your children diagnosed at the point of transition from primary to secondary school? They hadn't, right?
No.
Okay.
So with one of them, we were fairly sure and were waiting for school to, because obviously you have to see it in different settings, don't you? So we'd had a fairly strong idea for a while, but school weren't detecting it and didn't detect it until year 9. And I think the reason for that is probably because we were potentially supporting really well, supporting really well, so that they went into school with all their kit and were quite well organised, because we were the buffer around it probably. And then in year 9, as that independence kicks in, there's more resistance to parents interfering, and I think that's when it became more obvious for one. And for the other, it took us even longer than that to realise, because, as you know, there was a different diagnosis that we were able to hang quite a few things on. There was an ASC diagnosis that explained quite a lot before the ADHD then became really apparent. But I mean, some children are doing transitions for year 9, and I used to say, because I was from the independent sector, when you're doing that year 9 transition, there's quite a lot of pressure, in a sense, on children to go into the new school and to settle quite quickly, because some schools are starting their GCSE curriculums towards the end of year 9, and certainly year 10 and 11 is heads down and getting on. So for those that are doing those year 9 transitions, that's an interesting time.
Yeah, like what you said there. So if you are a young person listening to this, or what advice would you give them as they're heading towards the summer? Obviously, they're going to have a big break, but as we know that kind of towards the end of that summer, the anxiety will start to creep in, and the realization of, right, okay, I'm literally moving to another school here,
or college, or
college. So what advice would you give the young person?
So
listening?
One of the things I would say is getting that routine started before the Monday or the first day of school. So, and I try to do that, and I get kickback. It's still the school holidays. I don't need to go to bed at such and such time. It's school holidays. But I would begin to start getting a week or so beforehand, getting back into that routine where you've got predictable bedtimes and you're getting up at a certain time. So you're beginning to readjust that body clock a bit, because particularly for teenagers, there's a great tendency, isn't there, to kind of go to bed a bit later, sleep in a bit later, and that can add so much tension to the morning if you're still in that kind of frame of mind, and that's particularly hard for kids with ADHD. So although it would go against all your instincts and you still feel it's holiday time, do allow your parents to kind of help guide you to get a routine going before that very first day of school.
Sorry to interrupt. How far in advance would you start this kind of routine?
I don't know. What do you think? I mean, I would be saying, the school holidays aren't, for some, the school holidays are longer if you're in the independent sector. But, if you're in the state sector, the school holidays don't feel like they go on endlessly. I would say probably a week beforehand, a few days before, or 5 days beforehand.
Well, I suppose every young person is different. Sometimes parents know their child well, that they've gone through other transitions before. So some children, if they have an additional condition, for example, like if they have autism on top of that transition might take a while to actually get them to get used to that routine or be more familiar with it. So a week, or they might need a bit longer than that. So a week to 2 weeks, but at the same time, is to try to balance it to the point where realizing that it's still school holidays.
Yeah.
We don't want to sort of punish them and say, your bedtime is
Yeah.
at 8 o'clock, whereas there might be a bit of a kickback there. So
use your prior experiences, really, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of how has your child adapted, or how have you, as the young person, if you're being really honest with yourself, adapted to the beginning of the school year, and kind of add some pre-planning in, perhaps a little bit longer if you're into one of those big transitions, if you're not just transitioning between year groups but you're actually transitioning into a new environment. Factor in a little bit of extra time just to deal with those kind of anxieties that will start to creep in possibly within that kind of week building up to the beginning of school. So be guided by your own prior experiences.
Exactly. And certainly practice that routine of going to school as well, like being familiar with the journey, being it if they're commuting by themselves or the parents are taking them to school. Maybe just try and do that journey. Maybe
and it's also things like, and I was a shocker at this as a parent, leaving, doing things like getting the shoes until the last minute. Oh, I'm just going to wait and see if your feet have grown a little bit over the summer.
Yeah.
But it's getting all those to us as adults, perhaps kind of small things that you kind of think, oh, of course, like, we'll do that next week. I've allowed plenty of time to do that. For a young person, that can add in an extra layer of anxiety. Have I got my school uniform? Have I got my school shoes? Am I going to be teased because I haven't got all my equipment? Am I going to... So it's getting all that kind of stuff so that you feel prepared in advance. You've got your PE kit, your stuff is labelled, all those kind of things that we as parents have to take responsibility for, getting that kit, sewing in those labels or ironing on those labels or whatever. But actually that anxiety is felt very much sometimes by the young person. And so we've kind of got a responsibility to try and again predict that and avoid it if we can by being prepared ourselves and kind of pre-planning. Kitting out with school pencil kit, a case, and all that. That's quite some kids find that quite a fun activity. But again, just having all that kind of kit and equipment ready, probably before within that last week of school of the holidays, so that your child mentally, as the kind of any potential anxieties are going to creep in about that literal transition, that literally having to leave the house and go to a new environment, begins to kick in those last few days of the holidays. The other stuff is in place and sorted, and so that's not an extra layer that they're having to worry about.
And if the young person knows other young people moving to that same school as well, it's that peer support that might be helpful.
Definitely.
So getting in touch with someone else, and the obviously young people can relate to each other as much as parents might be doing the best as they can to support the young person. But if it's coming from another young person who maybe has gone through a transition, maybe someone who's in year 9 or year 8 who's gone through that transition, that might be something that parents can maybe see if they can get the young person to speak to another young person who's gone through it.
Yeah, so use those personal contacts, or the contacts. Some schools are very good at putting people in touch with each other. So you're linking people up before the beginning of school term, potentially, so that they have got some familiar faces. I'd probably also be having a conversation with them about that kind of social side, that friendship side, particularly if they're going with friends that are already established. That's great to have that pre-made little friendship group, but also to open up that conversation that when you go to a secondary school or when you move off to a sixth form college or whatever, there are by definition far more people coming in from far more places, and that friendship group might get a little bit shaken up with new characters coming in and a potential best friends being pulled in different directions, and just having that conversation so that they know that they're not the only one if they do experience that. So it's just that kind of conversation with them that when you're going to secondary school or when you're going to college, there will be lots more people. It's great that you've got your friends, but don't forget there will be more people, and you'll make new friends, and your friends will also make new friends, and just so that becomes then a bit of an open conversation, so that they can perhaps come home to you and say, what you said about friends, I'm feeling a bit worried about.
Yeah. Do schools, do they still have learning mentors? Because some schools used to have.
Some do and some don't. Again, it all will depend on your kind of own school environments.
Right.
Probably, I don't know about the state sector. Quite a few independent schools will.
Right.
Where you're buddied up with someone and things like that.
Yeah, or just to support the young person with the increased academic demands or the social, social side of things as well. So, yeah. And
again, it will depend on what you're going into school with. So your report that may have gone to the SENCO may have triggered the SENCO to kind of think, well, actually, let's get a bit of additional support in straight away. Let's have some one-to-one meetings while you transition. So some will offer some kind of transition meetings, which are meant to be kind of short-term, maybe just for half a term. Your report may have triggered the SENCO to kind of think, actually, we need something a bit more than that. We might put in some extra literacy support for you or math support or whatever. So you might be going into your new environment with some additional support factored in, and that tends to be being able to work with somebody one-to-one or in a small group, and those are often quite good opportunities to be able to just perhaps express some of the anxieties that you might be feeling that you can't yet express to anyone else because you don't know anyone well enough. So if you've got that individual learning support teacher or whatever, they're quite a good person to use as a bit of a support mechanism for you while you find your feet.
With now we know how prevalent ADHD is. So in most cases, schools, secondary schools, they would have had quite a few young people going through that same process as well. So that in a way is sort of, you could say it's quite reassuring, but obviously every young person is different. They bring different needs to that they have. So, but the good thing to remember, it's ADHD, as I said, is very commonly something that's very common around that age group anyway. Yeah. And most schools, you could say to some extent, are have hopefully got the right resources and would have had experiences of supporting other young people there, but.
Yeah, you absolutely. Your teachers. You will not be the first ADHD individual that your teachers will have come across and taught, and they will have hopefully great strategies to kind of help maximise your opportunities to learn. So it absolutely, you won't be the first individual, and nor will you be the last. But you are your own individual, and it's really good for them to understand what really works well for you.
Are there any kind of support groups out there? Because obviously, just speaking of groups, there is something that, just change my camera there. There's something that we have started. I've run this before in the NHS, but it's a transition group for young people moving from primary school to secondary school, dedicated to the actual young people themselves. So it's over 4 days, helping them, one, to meet with other young people going through the same situation as them, and two, learn strategies, practical things from, packing your bag, looking through your timetable, to navigating through the school map, knowing which class is where, to preparing them on some of the anxiety that they might have and maybe talk them through. And
in that kind of safe space.
Space. So that's something that, as I said, I'm really passionate about, and we're quite excited that we that's something that we do.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And if, there are still spaces. So if there's any parents out there, you have a young person that's transitioned to secondary school, there is a workshop that we are running, as I said, over 5 days from August the 14th all the way to the 18th. And we also have a workshop for the parents on the last day, which is basically just feeding back all of what we've been doing with the young people and just give them some tips and hints and things similar to what we're covering today. So, but that's something I'd like to see more of, I suppose, in terms of like having support groups for the actual young people themselves. I'm not sure if there is anything for parents actually, like a support group that they can go to, which is specifically focusing on transition. Do schools run these transition workshops or groups at all, as far as you're concerned?
Some. So some. I probably, to be honest, more in the independent sector, some of them will actually kind of even do a kind of a more of a neurodiverse day rather than just a year 6 going into year 7 type day. So I've heard of some schools starting a little bit earlier, for example, for children with ASC, ADHD, those who might find that transition difficult, to kind of start with far fewer people there. But, I don't think it's a kind of a common thing at the moment. And as you say, it comes down again to time and funding and all the rest of it. And it would be a great resource, but you might be lucky and be going to somewhere that offers that extra layer of support. But if you're not, don't worry, because if you can work with parents and any other people that that are going to the school that you're going to, and the kind of workshop that Archie's talking about running, then you should still get yourself into a position where you feel more confident about what's going to happen. But it'd be great if schools could run the kind of things that you're doing. But
yeah, hopefully give you time. So if there's any schools out there, I'm giving you some ideas. I've got the resources, the materials already ready to go. So again, just coming back to you when you were working in school. So how does that year 7 or first term of settling in September look like, just to prepare someone listening out there who wants to have a picture of an idea of, are we just going to go straight into it? We're going to have homework on a day-to-day basis. How do you kind of lay out that timetable during that transition into kind of starting in secondary school, or even moving into year 9?
So probably you'd hope that the school would. You'll probably all have a form tutor, I'd imagine. I think that's probably the most common format now, is that you go into a kind of a form with a form tutor, and often in year 7, 8, you might even move around the school in your form group. And sometimes your form group can be kind of shaken up for subjects like English and maths, and there might be some mixing of groups. But often you'll move around in those early years in your form group. So they're great kids to kind of get to know. Your form tutor is a really good person to get to know, because they are the kind of the first person you would go to with any difficulties that you might want to kind of share. And they will be the ones that kind of probably get the overview from teaching staff about, how your week is going. So the SENCO would also potentially get that overview if there was a need to bring the SENCO in for additional support. And your school day would look like, it does start quite quickly when you go into secondary school. So you would hope your form tutor would have things like maps that they might be able to give you, layout of the kind of the school site. And if they haven't, it might be even worth asking them if they have got one. So you do lots of kind of housekeeping stuff when you start with your form tutor in that first day. So they will give you the timetable if they haven't given it to you already. And any kind of homework diaries and things like that you need. So that first day or two of going into school, it normally is the form tutor that's equipping you with all that kind of stuff. So maybe kind of make a note to yourself of the things that would help you. So, would that school, what kind of school are you going to? Are you going to a school that's got quite a complex layout? Would it be quite useful to have a school map? And if you don't get one, maybe ask your form tutor on that first day, so that you can perhaps get one on the second morning, and that then helps to minimise anxieties and things. But lessons do start pretty quickly in that September. But the first few lessons will be just meeting your teachers and getting to know your different subject teachers. So it will probably take a week or two for homework to start. Some schools have a policy where they don't give homework for maybe the first half term or whatever. So again, it's really hard to be specific. It will all come down to the school, but they'll have a good system planned for that transition to introduce you to your teachers, and for you to get all the kind of the information and the equipment that you need from your form tutor that will set you up for your schooling year.
Excellent. So, and any other sort of final tips for that sort of transition that we talked about, primary school to secondary school, before we move on to another different type of transition, which is to college and university and things? Anything else that you can think of?
Well, the whole thing is going to be big and new, and it's as you said earlier, it's a case of, you know, if parents can kind of talk you through, and maybe even kind of practicing that journey into school a couple of days beforehand, knowing that you've got all your equipment sorted out, reassuring you that teachers do this year in, year out, and they are very experienced at helping to make your progress into their school as smooth as it can be, linking up with anyone that you might know, or kind of older role models that can talk to you about about how they found it. That's all going to help, isn't it? And then you're going to be guided by the school and their own processes and policies and how they do it. But and it's silly things like, you know, so many kids when I was at school, so many kids on that first day might misplace their timetable, or the timetable might go through the washing machine, or and it's just having the confidence to be able to kind of say to your form tutor, can I have another timetable? That's fine. They're expecting you to ask those kind of things. And if you haven't got the confidence to do it, maybe sending in an email. So again, it's kind of, things happen, teachers know things happen, it's not the end of the world. Don't try not to kind of get over worried about it, but do try and let people know as soon as possible so that they can help you to get back on track and get hold of that timetable again, or whatever it is that has slightly kind of thrown you.
It's that, what I find is that increased demand in independence is, they expect to be able to know where to go, you know, take responsibility of your belongings, your knowing, you know, you got your PE kit, your books and things, and managing your time effectively. So basically all the executive functioning, that's literally being tested to the limit when you have ADHD. As an education consultant, because obviously you also support young people through kind of what you're doing now, that are maybe, you know, struggling with things like homework or revision, you know, giving them study skills and things. So what other advice would you be giving to anyone in regards to that side of things? And obviously it's a big subject. We were talking just off air about executive functioning, and I know you got a publication that you're kind of trying to work through at the moment. So we can discuss about that later on. But so if maybe let's spend a few minutes just talking about the executive functioning that's being kind of tested to the limit with your ADHD in a secondary school setting. Yes, so
you were kind of saying what, beyond that kind of transition, how do you prepare for work, study skills and all the rest of it? I would say your organisation is going to be key, and of course that's the thing that's going to be most challenged. That executive function is going to be the thing that's most challenged as you move away from that secure primary school environment where a lot of that is done for you, where to a point where you've got more independence in the secondary school, and you need to find out what your school's policy is. Is it online planners that they use? So are they setting homework online? And if they are, in a sense, that's great because it's there and you can access it and your parents can access it. If you've been given a homework planner, so you're still in a school that still uses the kind of the homework planner, then one way of kind of helping to manage any anxiety is to make sure that you do use that planner to the max. So when teachers say to you to write homework down, that you actually do, you're not going to hold it in your head. You might think you are. You might think you'll remember it when you get home, but you know, you go to 3 other lessons and what was set becomes a distant memory. So using the resources that they give you to be as planned as you can be. You were talking about the executive function skills. So it's coming out of that summer period and into that academic environment again, where school has started, and mastering things like your ability to kind of prioritise tasks and your ability to overcome your desire to procrastinate, or your time management, so that, you know, when you have been set work, try and get into really kind of healthy routines where you come home. If you're in a school where you can get it done at school, then that's great because you can stay and you can get it done. And then when you come home, home can be the place where you can switch off because you've done what you need to do. But if you're going home to do your homework, try and get into really healthy routines where you've noted what you need to do in the day. You either have access to it on the computerised system that the school might be operating, or you've really accurately recorded it in your planner. Don't just put geography homework, because you're not going to know what that geography homework is. Be specific, copy it down from the board. See if school have got any things that they'll allow you to do to help support that. So some schools will allow you to take a snapshot of the whiteboard, for example, if the homework's been written down, so that you've got a record of it on a laptop or a phone or whatever. But if they don't allow you to do that, and a lot of schools do have a kind of a non-mobile phone policy, which is great, then you've got to be quite careful about noting down what the teacher writes. And if actually, there's a teacher that always leaves it to the last minute to write things down on the board for homework, say to your form teacher or your parent or your learning support teacher, it would be really helpful if Mr. So-and-so put the homework up on the board sooner, because I don't have time to write that down before I need to run on to the next lesson. So it's being aware of things that you can flag that could be helpful to you, and it's getting into those healthy routines so that you are trying to master those executive function skills, and you are not coming home and gaming. The minute you kind of go into that gaming scenario, it's really hard to then stop and do homework and things. So try and get the balance right, so you're getting the things that you need to do done first, and then you can reward yourself with the things that are fun to do afterwards. Come home, have a snack, have a drink, have a break, but don't get sucked into things that you're going to find really hard to wind down and come off.
Yeah, exactly. I suppose it's that routine that we're talking about, isn't it? Just to know, okay, I'll do this for this time, and as you say, you'd rather get the homework, anything out of the way first before you kind of go into your kind of activities such as like gaming or any kind of leisure activities and things. So it is challenging. I suppose that's where parents can come in as well, and just to have that routine set from literally when they start secondary school. Absolutely.
And as a parent, understand that you might be looking at work spans of 15 minutes. Your child might come home and once they've had their break and their snack and whatever, and they're cracking down on with their homework, actually 15-minute bursts might be what they can do. Therefore there's no point them sitting there for 25 minutes. Get a good quality 15 minutes out of them. They go off, do something for a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, then come back and do the last bit of that particular piece that they need to do. So you have to respond to kind of what you see in front of you. How long can you sustain that attention and play to that? Because otherwise homework is going to seem quite traumatic and quite drawn out, because you're trying to work longer than your attention will allow you. So play to what you've got. Understand what your attention is. Work to your maximum for that period of time. Take a break. Come back. Is that what you would go for?
No, absolutely. If you're talking there, I was just thinking back to primary school, the later years of primary school, year 5, year 6. Do they? Because obviously my kids are quite young; they haven't reached that stage yet. But do the schools start to prepare young people for secondary school in terms of their homework?
They are getting some homework and things,
and being able to know which homework is due when, and just to start to get used to that, rather than it being you move to secondary school and it's kind of like a big shock to the system.
I mean, yes, they are getting bits of homework in those last years of primary school. I should think it's still going to be an adjustment for secondary school, because you're going to have different teachers setting things, whereas one person having the overview.
Yeah, of course.
But most schools will now have a policy, and it's probably recorded somewhere, and you can ask to see it, or you're probably going to be given it, that there are set days for homework. So, there is a set day that the maths teacher will set a piece of homework, and there's a set day that the English teacher will set a piece of homework. And I would say, so the problem with the absence of these kind of paper planners, where everything's online now for some schools, so it's great in one sense because the child doesn't have to do that last minute recording off the board of what the homework is. But what it's taken away that kind of physical planner where you can put in not only when the homework's set, but when it's due. And maybe having a kind of planner at home that you keep, a physical planner that you keep with your child, or if you're a young person listening in, with your parents, so that you come home and you put down when the homework is due in. Because that's the thing, you can do the homework, but you can still flunk it by not taking it in on the right day. Or, if there's a lead up to it, if you haven't got those good routines going of getting it done straight away, you can miss your deadline, because in your mind you think, I don't have to do that for a few days. And lo and behold, a few days comes and goes. And the absence of that kind of planner, that paper planner, means that you don't necessarily see when things are due in. And maybe having a kind of a planner on your wall, or a kind of a physical planner at home where you've got that visual and you can see the days, you can plot the days that the subject's going to be set. And then you can do that in advance, because most schools will know in advance what subjects are being set on each day. But then when you'll set that work on your planner, write in a different colour pen. And I've heard some people say to do it in a different orientation. So on your planner, you might write geography on a Monday for that it's been set, and you're doing that horizontally as we conventionally write. But then some people on their planner do geography going up vertically, for example, on the day that it's due in a different colour pen. So it draws your eye to it as a marker that you need to be aware of. That's the golden day that I need to take that in. I've done it. And the other thing when we were talking about is you're going to have books, exercise books and textbooks for all your different subjects. And a lot of schools allow you to take that stuff home and back again, in and out of school. And some people are like little tortoises and carry those rucksacks on their back with absolutely everything in it, because they don't want to forget anything. But you really should get into the habit of the night before, what are the subjects I've got? I'm going to pack my bag the night before. I'm going to make sure I've got the right books, but I'm not going to carry absolutely everything around with me. And so you're looking at your planner the night before, you're seeing what your subjects are, and you're kind of loading your bag accordingly. And then you're looking at your planner and you're seeing in perhaps in that vertical line in red that geography's due in, and you're making sure that you're packing that as well, so that you're really trying to avoid the hiccups that could come. Hiccups will still come, and that is a fact of life, and we can't avoid that, but you're trying as hard as possible to minimise them.
One thing I wanted us to talk about was behaviour, and what steps can parents go about, particularly when the young person's presenting some concerns that are being flagged up by the school. Some of it could be down to them still trying to find their feet in secondary school, settling in and things, but so again, what would you be your... Obviously, I'll give you my take on this, but I just wanted to get your take just in terms of what would be the best approach to go about trying to support and understand what might be going on in the school that's causing the young person to have particular challenges with their behaviour.
So for that transition period, first of all, I'd say, you could have a young person that's going into school who is feeling anxious and therefore potentially a bit withdrawn, and not their normal selves. That can make kind of forging those friendships, those initial friendships beyond the children that they've transitioned with, a little bit more tricky. And in my experience, you can also have kids with ADHD going into school who kind of overdo it. I'm sure you kind of know what I mean. Those kind of kids who are just overacting the situation because of the anxiety probably that they're feeling, or potentially the excitement, but they're a bit too much in the eyes of some people, and that's a really hard one. Once we let them go at the beginning of the day, we've got no control over how they're going to respond to people. But I suppose having those conversations, you might feel that you are a little bit withdrawn, or you might feel that you are a little bit exuberant, and again, just having that open flow of conversation at home so that the child can kind of self-reflect a little bit and maybe try and come to being the person that they normally are beyond that stage of transition a bit more quickly. Because I don't know, do you think that you can get a slight kind of sense of withdrawal or holding back of a personality, or a sense of overplaying for some, because they're feeling that they've got to prove themselves and move into a new situation as quickly
it's
as they
hard,
can.
isn't it? Because you've got the peers
really
there.
hard.
They're trying to find where they fit with amongst their peer group. They're in a new environment. They're trying to suss out the teachers at the same time. The word masking comes into mind here, where you might find that they might be, bottling it in school, and for it might then come out when they go home. But certainly, it could be anxiety. It could be just about them, as I said, just trying to find their feet and trying to observe some. It might appear as if they're withdrawn, but obviously that's something just to be mindful of in terms of just keeping an eye on a young person. If, particularly for parents, if they start to see certain traits in a young person, if they're coming home, not really maybe communicating much, not wanting to spend time with the family, or just isolating themselves, that's something that's very crucial. It's about having that. Giving them the freedom to be able to communicate as best as they can without putting them under that pressure. Being mindful that obviously it's very important to keep a dialogue with the school. If parents are noticing certain behavioural traits that the school haven't flagged up, it might be worth maybe just as a parent just reaching out to the school, mentioning it.
And I think on the whole, kids go in and they want to conform, they want to kind of fit in, don't they? And the place that we see that perhaps dysregulation, that kind of emotional outburst is probably more likely to be at home than it is at school. And certainly that would be probably my experience as a parent, and certainly as a SENCO, parents contacting me and saying, that their child is really kind of emotionally dysregulated or upset or whatever at home, or angry. And, at school we weren't seeing anything like that. And so I suppose, parents to understand that actually, kids are very social beings, and they'll be at school trying their hardest to forge their friendships and fit in. And you might just have to hold on tight at home, because you might experience the emotional dysregulation at home a little bit, because it has been tough and it's taken it out of them holding it together at school. So there's that kind of counter argument, isn't there, that actually as a kind of a people, we try and conform and fit in, and that kind of overacting that I was talking about earlier, on the whole kids will want to go in and kind of try and find their place and fit in, and it might be where you find it more tricky is just at home when they're coming back, and so just, as I say, hold on tight. It's probably happening at home, it's probably not happening at school. And then when you were saying, where there are outbursts at school, I think you were kind of alluding to that, how do we deal with that when there are? That's a tricky one. Hopefully your kind of pastoral team have been kind of warned about that, and I'd be saying that, you need to, if there can be a kind of a favoured adult, an adult that the child feels kind of comfortable with, to just sit down and unpick it if it needs unpicking. What happened? Why did it happen? Because often the outburst is in response to something that we as teachers haven't been able to see initially. So something might have triggered an outburst, and it's very easy to kind of react to the behaviour without understanding what caused the child to get to that point. So having somebody that's able to have that kind of relationship in school, it might be the form tutor. If it's something that is more of a kind of a factor of the child's life, then it might be, for example, the school counsellor or the ELSA, and as adults, again, not to overreact to that. That's seen as a positive, supportive thing in place for a child that needs it. But on the whole, children go in and they want to fit in, and hopefully those transition periods will be as smooth as they can be.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are some positives as well. It sounds like it's all doom and gloom.
No, no. I mean, we're talking about, the kind of the point of this is to talk about what is the worst case scenario that we can kind of equip ourselves for, and hopefully a lot of this will be something that won't be relevant. But in those worst case scenarios, how can we help?
Yeah, and then being prepared, if anything.
Absolutely,
so absolutely.
No, it's totally not doom and gloom. And for most, that transition will be, every single child in the country will be feeling anxiety, whoever they are, at some level, about that change, won't they?
Yeah.
And that's normal, and it's a big change, and they accommodate very quickly. Kids are very kind of accommodating. So, and hopefully your child falls into that kind of category. We've been talking about, how do we, for those that need that extra bit, how do we predict what's going to happen, and how do we manage that situation?
Absolutely. Right. Transition to I want to move on to talk about transition into later adult life, but as a teenager moving into kind of secondary college, university stage, because that's another transition that some young people will be going through, particularly this coming September. So some of those that have received their results coming out next month, actually. So that's another big one. So be it GCSEs or A levels, there is some transition that's going to come.
Sure.
Some will be staying at the same school, but it's still a transition, isn't it?
Yeah.
Moving GCSEs going into A levels or moving to college. So where do we start with this one?
Well, so this is an interesting one, isn't it? Because they're even older.
Yeah.
And there's more expectation for independence, and there's more resistance to parental input.
Yeah.
So if you're, that transition from a school to a sixth form college, or from a school college to university, carries the same kind of underlying worries that those transitions that we were talking about for a rising year 7 will carry. But there's a greater internalisation, I'd probably say, about that. Would you agree, where, the young person will kind of perhaps carry it a bit more themselves than sharing it with their parents? But go on.
I was just about to say, I had a conversation with Karen Keane when we were discussing about supporting young people who are about to do the exams and things, and the common trend that I've noticed as well is those young people that are moving to university that have really, really struggled, whereby some of them have actually moved away from home, and that need for independence has really, really been tested to the limit, if you want to call it that. And caused some issues. Doesn't happen in all cases, but that's something that I've noticed, that it's such a significant transition. Some of them have tried to keep it together and navigated through it, but some have struggled. So I think that shouldn't be underestimated. I think young people, I'm not sure what's in place, for example, when they move to university, how are universities supporting them throughout that transition?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one. So one of my children is ADHD and ASC, and that transition to university each year is massive, because you have a long summer at home, and then you have to get ready to leave again. And because you're over the age of 18, there's very little that universities will do to interact with a parent. It is all down to the young person. And so I suppose it's keeping that conversation going with your young adult child as much as you can, so that they're telling you when things are becoming overwhelming for them or tricky for them. And you can remind them to kind of send them towards the student services and the support services that are there, and the kind of counselling services if they need it. But really, my experience is that it sits on their shoulders, and you have to kind of help equip them. Although I did hear the other day that that's changing, isn't it? That parents are now being allowed to have some kind of input with universities, and if you're worried about your child, I would say get your child to kind of do a kind of consent that you're allowed to talk to support services or whatever.
Oh, really?
Well, if your young adult consents to you talking to them. But I mean, I've been in that situation, and again, it is very limited in terms of the information that they'll give you. So I would just keep that flow of conversation going between you and the young person, and remind them of the services that are out there. And when it's in the upper 6th year, I think, isn't it, that you start thinking about applying for DSA, Disability Student Allowance. So that's a great thing to be looking at and applying for, because they create a package of support for you that universities have to kind of put into place. And so I've had experience of a package of support that has included things like, 20 hours a year of study support, 20 hours a year of counselling support if you need it, and things like that. It's beyond just they help you with things like computers and laptops and printing and software and things like that. But what they can do is they can recommend those kind of support services. So that's a good thing to be looking at before you transition off to university, to get that application underway, so that you've got the kind of the additional support there that the university can help provide.
Mm-hmm. I see young people. I saw the other young person the other day who he's at university second year. And I think I can see where the parents are coming from. They're trying to promote independence by asking him to come to the appointment by himself, which is great. So it's those things that it's like, I think the 16 to 18-year-old transitional period is very tricky for some young people. Certainly from a sort of clinical point of view, what we used to have in the old days, we used to have 16 to 25-year-old transitional services that would carry on kind of supporting you, offering you your care, reviewing your kind of, because most services, particularly the National Health Service, is set up in terms of you got, up to 18, which is kind of the child and adolescent mental health services or pediatric services, and then you go straight into the adult services, which it's such a, from being kind of, turning 18 and you expected to come and speak for yourself, don't involve the parents, and certainly the services don't involve parents at all. I still see young people, 19, 20-year-olds, still bringing their parents into the consultation. And so imagine then having to move to Exeter or Devon University, and then having to then be responsible for looking after yourself and registering with the GP, knowing what all the things that we're talking about, timetable, lessons, lectures, when it's due when.
And also that those executive function skills, that you're suddenly totally in control of yourself. So, how do you socialise? Do you socialise to the point that you miss your lectures the following morning because you're still asleep? Do you know when to call it quits? How do you prioritise that you are attending things or handing things in, and not leaving things till the night before, where you're trying to produce an essay that's X number of thousands of words long, and you're having to burn the midnight oil, and you're suddenly the one that's in control of all of that without anybody else overseeing you. And in one sense, it's a great sense of liberation and freedom, but you've got to be careful not to kind of misplay it, and just to keep the balance right, and do the kind of the same things that we were talking about for that earlier transition, but you're now responsible for it. As you said, kind of keeping a good planner, so you know where you are with things. You know what your deadlines are. How to organise your room so that you've got a kind of a study space. Your study space isn't completely filled up with all your lotions and potions and all that. It's those kind of things, and I mean that's the transition from 18 through to university, isn't it? But I think what we can be doing is getting kids ready for that whilst they're still at home. So that's 16 to 18, those two crucial years that you were talking about. What we can be doing is developing their sense of independence while they're still with us. So, as I was making breakfast for a 15-year-old this morning, I did kind of think to myself, this is absolutely nuts. I ought, a cooked breakfast, I oughtn't to be doing this. You should be doing this. And it's what we don't want is to have an 18-year-old that's never made a meal, never put on a wash, never, done any of those kind of domestic things that suddenly is going to be on their shoulders when they leave home to go to university. So I think in those 2 years, 16 to 18, even if we haven't started it sooner, there are those life skills that we can be just drip feeding in, aren't there? So, once a week you're going to make a family dinner for us, or, you're going to do the washing up, or you're going to do your own washing, or, start factoring, and I've got to listen to my own advice, start factoring in those kind of life skills. Because if you've got those kind of life skills, if, some kids go to university and they've never even boiled pasta. I know that we haven't helped them, have we?
No, certainly. And sometimes I think about myself as well when, like what you're saying, not to say I had a massive, great transition, but certainly those things I can remember, my parents preparing me, like in terms of okay, just learn the basics. Like, this is how you make this, so that you could just, instead of relying on takeaway or neglecting yourself in terms of like food and things, sleeping and all of that. So it's like what you said, is going back to kind of preparing them for the future and kind of go, okay, you're moving to university next year, so how about if we start to give you some responsibilities in terms of maybe you can try and do this, or maybe you can arrange this appointment yourself. And but as I said, that transition in itself, I think when you look at a young person with ADHD developmentally, we know ADHD, sometimes they could be a bit like a year or 2 years behind anyway. So
their executive functioning can be kind of up to 4 years delayed.
Exactly. So if you're, developmentally like age, I mean, like your age is chronologically like 18, but certainly if you're, we're talking about, being behind developmentally, then being expected to respond or do things as a typical 18-year-old, it's we have to be very mindful of that.
We need to help to prepare for it.
We have to, and be mindful that are they at that stage yet to be able to be responsible for cooking something or do this or do that, but they need that support from maybe a bit earlier on, maybe.
And I guess it's, when you're applying to university, because we've had this, do you go into halls of residence, or do you apply for university accommodation where you're living in a flat or whatever? And often halls of residence comes with a kind of catering package, doesn't it? And those kind of student flats often don't. So I when you're looking at universities, you're looking at what's the distance from home? Is that of any relevance at all? Does it matter to you if you're up, in my experience, up in St Andrews? So one of mine chose to go up to St Andrews, and, that's miles away. If there is any need to kind of come home for weekends, or if there's any need for you to kind of step in and go and visit beyond the kind of the pleasure visits that you might put in. So does the geography of the university matter? Does it need to be kind of near home, far away from home? And then when you're looking at your applications for accommodation and things, realistically, what's the best place for you to be applying for? Would a good transition be to be applying for a hall of residence that's got that catering package factored in, because that allows you to move away from home, but with that kind of support around you, that you don't have to worry about food and things? Or actually, are you ready to be moving into a student flat where you are more independent and cooking for yourself? And so those are kind of decisions that I think we can kind of forget the importance of. And we need to kind of remember, actually, when they're going through it, and they think they know everything at 18. But what guidance can we give them about where they want to apply to live and things like that?
But I suppose when you apply, you never know. I suppose, are you talking about your first choice, second choice and things? Or, because sometimes do you actually know exactly where you might end up? You might not end up having your first choice university.
So when you're applying and you go for your first choice university, you're normally applying for the accommodation in advance. So you kind of know what you're applying for in advance. But if you're then falling back on your second choice, or you're going into clearing, then you've had none of that opportunity of kind of pre-thinking and pre-planning, have you, about where you might end up living. And often at that point you end up where you get put, because you get put into the accommodation that is available. So again, I suppose it's that kind of pre-planning. Even if we think, my child is going to go to a hall of residence with food factored in, actually getting them between 16 and 18 to begin to kind of do those life skills anyway. We're kind of equipping them beyond university, but certainly maybe minimising some hiccups that could come along if they don't get the grades they want, they end up in clearing and end up in accommodation that they hadn't kind of pre-chosen and things.
And then certainly from my perspective, for the ones that are taking medication, which I'm sure you're one of your children, this would apply as well, that responsibility of having to take the medication.
But not only take the medication, but get the medication delivered regularly, so you're not running out of it. So that you're either sticking with your old GP and getting your medication through the old GP, but then how does it get to you at university, or you're registering with the university doctor and registering for them to have that kind of care package so that they can get the medication, and that you're then getting it regularly enough that you haven't kind of taken your last one before you realise that you need a a new order.
Just from your knowledge of universities and things, how are they aware of neurodiversity, and how, what support is out there? I suppose it varies depending on what university you go to, but I can kind of see them trying to put it down to the young person to be more responsible and things, but are there any provisions that they have that they can try and support the young person?
So I mean, universities would say there's been a great development and change, and their provision is much better now, and I think it is, and there's a much more increased awareness of neurodiversity. I think my personal experience would be that the support is only there if you make it known that you need it. So if you're in a big lecture of 200 kids, the lecturer's not going to know that you've got a particular need. If you're struggling with your tutor to hand in an assignment or whatever, they're not going to know. They're just going to know that you're the person that's handing things in late. I think you've got to be more proactive, is what I would say, and say to them, I'm finding it difficult to meet this deadline. Can I have an extension? Or I'm struggling with some emotional regulation at the moment. Is there anyone I can talk to? It's not going to come to you. It's just my personal experience.
But that's a hard one, though.
Yeah, it's hard.
It's a bit like we asking for people to actually. Usually that happens when they are at a crisis point to actually go. Do you know what? I actually need help.
Yeah. And that can come back to that DSA thing. So, if you've got through the DSA, if you've got some support factored in, and you can get into a habit of kind of regularly booking some support meetings in. But often, I think the young person does leave it to the point of crisis. And even if, again, in my experience, even if you've got that DSA kind of package, if you don't turn up to those meetings, or you say to the support services that you don't need those meetings, then you kind of can drop off the radar. And at the point where you become aware that you need them, as you say, is often in that kind of crisis point. So that's tough, because they're booked and they need kind of pre-warning about needing to book in sessions and things. So it's becoming aware. I suppose it's trying to develop your own sense of awareness and stepping in before it gets to crisis point. But that's a massive life skill, isn't it? Yeah. For all of us, to be able to see that in ourselves, that we're getting to the point where we're finding it hard to kind of cope with something, or with ADHD, you're much more likely to avoid, and it to become clear to you at the last minute that you're struggling. So I've got 5,000 words to write. It doesn't have to be done for 2 weeks. That's fine. And, and it's only in those last few days that you might suddenly go, I'm not coping with this, I'm not managing. And you've got to have those strategies where you send an email to the tutor. And this is what I've been saying in my family to my child who's at university. You've got to let them know. You've got to, within your email, you've got to say, I don't know if you're aware, but I've got ADHD, I'm ASC, I'm finding it difficult at the moment. Please, can I have an extension on this? Or can I have a meeting with you because I need a bit more guidance from you? I didn't understand what I needed to do. Because you've got to self-advocate, I think. Would
it be worth making them aware before you actually get to that point where you are really struggling, so at least the university is aware, and I'm sure they have.
They should be, though, shouldn't? Presumably, I'm not aware of this. Obviously, having been within secondary and sixth form education, but especially through that DSA stuff, universities should be aware of the kind of the neurodiverse needs that are coming into that particular cohort.
But in terms of what are, because sometimes they can have it on paper that you've got ASC and you've got ADD, but they don't know exactly what are your struggles, what is it that you might need support with. So it's the actual details of, okay, this is what I struggle with.
So I've certainly said that to my child who's at university. I've said, you need to email and you need to say to your tutor, this is who I am. I'm ADHD, I'm ASC, and these are the things I'm going to find difficult. So we've just had a dissertation, which for someone with ADHD is super difficult in my experience, because it's kind of 10,000 words.
Yeah.
So it's not something that you can do at midnight the night before. But, you know, you get given a period of time to do it, and it feels that you've got a long time to do it. In my experience, my child was coming home and kind of saying, I don't even understand necessarily everything that tutor's saying to me about how I approach it. And I said, you have to therefore email your tutor and be explicit about what your needs are, and say, this is who I am, and this is these are my needs. And so for us, it was kind of you know, I'm ASC, I'm ADHD. I might often nod and tell you that I'm understanding, but I'm not. So if I email you and say, please, can you clarify, it's because I actually didn't take away from that what I think I needed to take away from it. Or can we have another meeting? And it was things like, you know, the language needs to be firm and clear language, not open to interpretation.
Yeah.
Because, you know, woolly language can cause quite a lot of trauma afterwards when you're trying to unpick it and kind of, I have no idea what that tutor was really saying to me.
Yeah.
But it was a case of self-advocacy. I couldn't advocate. You know, they're too old at that point. The system doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
And so it was, but I was able to kind of sometimes help put emails together, because I tried to keep that kind of conversation going, so that I was aware when things were getting difficult. And I suppose that as a parent is what we can do, is try and kind of keep those avenues of conversation going, so that we're not being super critical when they phone us and say, I've got a dissertation in tomorrow and I've only done, you know, 5,000 words, and you, instead of kind of, you know, our instinct would be to go, oh my God, how have you let it get to that point? But just kind of say, okay, right, we've got to this point, how can we move forward? Who are the people that we need to contact? How can you manage this?
And it has to be said that your daughter's doing a very difficult course anyway.
Yeah, really difficult course in medicine.
So
such a killer of a course.
Exactly. So that in itself, regardless whether you have a neurodiverse condition or not, it's quite intense. And she's in what year now? Is she?
Third, going into fourth.
Wow, it's gone quick.
I know. And then another transition is coming up. So we move from St Andrews now to Manchester. So
wow.
Yeah.
So another bit.
Even within that kind of degree, transitions are still happening.
You know what we'll probably need to do next time? We can keep tracking her and see how she's getting on. Because what I'll be interested for us to talk about in the future is about the transition from education to employment.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, and that's the other thing I was going to say to you about that kind of 16 to 18 period.
Yeah.
And now for my university daughter, over each summers, she's coming back and getting jobs, and was getting jobs from about age 16. And I think that's a really useful skill. It's got to be balanced so that the young person is not devoting too much time to the job. But I do think it teaches really good skills in terms of obligations, timekeeping, sense of value of money, so that again when you go off to university you've developed a bit of sense of money. So, you know, not necessarily a job every single weekend, but maybe sometimes an occasional holiday job, just as it is an extra way of getting ready for anybody, whoever we are, neurodiverse or not, of getting ready for that more independent life that's going to be led at university. Yeah,
makes sense. Absolutely, yeah. That whole responsibility and, you know, looking after money and all of that as well. So, and
not waking up kind of going, oh, I can't be bothered to do that today, because you've got a sense of obligation and starting to develop that sense of the person that you're going to be in the workplace.
I had a chat in the last podcast actually the other day with an ADHD careers coach, and we were talking about choosing the right career. If you have ADHD, sometimes that can be a bit tricky. How do you kind of work out and navigate yourself through that stage? And we were saying about at that age, particularly when most young people, they don't seem to know exactly what they want, and what being able to kind of work out what are your strengths, what are your skills, what are you passionate about. So that's kind of what she works with a lot of young adults in terms of trying to support them with that. And we were saying that that's not something that's incorporated in, like, you don't get schools I don't know if you probably would be the best person to ask, but do schools have anything around kind of trying to support young people with, because I know before we used to have connections that used to work with young people about employment and career and stuff. Is there something out there?
Yeah, so schools, if they go through to sixth form, will have kind of careers departments and things.
Yeah.
And I'm sure sixth form colleges have careers departments. Again, it's going to be down to the school and how much how extensive their provision is. Certainly in the last school that I was at that went through to 18, the careers lady was very passionate about trying to provide opportunities and show young people what the range of careers was out there, and would also look for certain schemes that might fit certain profiles. So I remember having conversations with her. We worked quite kind of closely over what would be the future for a particular ADHD person at school that might not be the conventional route. So I think we were looking at, would BTECs and things be a good solution? And, was university a really good career path, or was an apprenticeship? So, even at age 16, 17, 18, those kind of conversations were going on. But it is going to be down to the kind of the provision that the school has.
Yeah.
And some places will be able to provide more than others, inevitably. But I should imagine most sixth form environments would have some form of career planning. But again, it might be how proactive the young person is. So I think probably everyone gets given a careers planning session. But, actually, can you proactively ask for some more time because you've gone away, you've had a think, you've got some ideas, you want to go back and discuss it a bit more. I don't know, it's particularly in the state sector, I'm not sure about that, but I think certainly most independents, I'm sure places like the sixth form colleges will have those careers centres, but as I say, I would imagine to really get the best out of it, there will have to be a sense of proactive engagement with it, rather than kind of passive engagement. So you've got to kind of actively engage and go back and ask for more if something's piqued your interest, or you've got questions that you want answered.
You mentioned about the pupil passport earlier, which primary schools, some primary schools anyway, would have that they can then pass on to the secondary school. Wouldn't that be useful to have something almost similar for transitioning into kind of senior, later years education? Because that's basically what we expect in the young person to be able to then relate to the university to say, these are my challenges and things. Whereas if it's already written there and outlining exactly what their issues are and struggles, and this is how secondary school is implemented and trying to support them, and that's something that you can carry. It's a bit like an EHCP, but more specific to their... Really
good idea, because you university should get those professional reports that are written on you, so an ADHD report, an EdSite report, or whatever, but that doesn't have your voice in it, and as we've said earlier, those reports could have been potentially written a little while previously, but if we could get a system where that kind of pupil voice could come forward and you're able to kind of give a synopsis of how you feel your needs are at that moment, and how that institution can best support you, would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So any last minute words, final words to just share with our listeners, just in terms of any stage of this transition that we've been discussing?
I agree with you. You could listen to this and kind of go, oh my gosh, we're in for a really rocky ride. Don't take that away. Hopefully things will be as smooth as they can be. But if they're not, then hopefully we've covered some ideas and some strategies that might help to make it easier. Yeah,
and I think the key message to put out there as well is to involve the young person as much as we can across
Absolutely.
any form of transition,
Yeah,
because certainly it's about them. It's centering on them and their issues and their needs, and listening to them as well.
Yeah, totally. So they're listening to their voice, because they're the one that's living it.
Yeah.
So if there's someone at school that can do that, then
Yeah.
that's amazing. And as a parent, again, to have those channels of communication open so that they feel comfortable saying the things that they're finding hard, and they're feeling that we're not being judgmental about that, but perhaps supportive about it.
Yeah.
Really hard to do. I mean, we don't get it right, believe me. We don't get it right as parents all the time, but that's your ideal, isn't it? Where you've got those channels of communication, and you're the supportive part of their lives that can help kind of bridge the gap between them and school.
Yeah, and finally, for students waiting for their results.
Good luck. Yes, I seem to remember we were perhaps doing this a year ago with our last one and wishing them good luck.
Absolutely,
Good luck, and hopefully you will get the results that you want. And if you don't, then it isn't the end of the world. There are so many opportunities out there, and you're about to be able to play to your strengths, and just take a step back, take a big breath, and find people that can help to advise you if you haven't got what you want on the best next steps. So key people at school that you can talk to that might be able to advise you about how to manage the situation that you're in. But fundamentally, you're going through school, and you're soon going to be going into university or the workplace where you can really play to the amazing strengths that you've got.
Absolutely, was worth. So, Zoe, absolute pleasure.
Thank you very much.
As always. If anyone wants to reach out to you, particularly in terms of your education consultant sort of work, do you want to maybe share your website and contact details?
Yep. So I've set up an independent practice where I do assessments and educational consultancy, and it's under the heading of zoebeezer.com. So ZOEBEEZER.com.
Absolutely. Excellent. So you've jumped into the private world. Welcome. And excellent. So we'll stay in touch, and definitely
will do.
We'll,
good luck with that transition workshop. That sounds amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I forgot to mention that to you about it. Tell you what, we'll send you some details, and you can feel free to share with your friends, colleagues, and things. Fabulous. So absolutely. Thanks, Zoe.
Cheers, Archie.
Take care.
Okay.
Bye.